All right. Hey, folks. Welcome to, or back, I guess, to the main stage here at the Origin Summit at Korea Blockchain Week. I think we already got introduced, all of us here, which did a big chunk of my job, which is nice. Just a quick kind of intro to what we're going to get into here. This panel on the battle for AI training data, I'm particularly excited about. At Frequency, we really have been focused on securing people's data. We secure people's, about 10 million people, 12 million people now actually, securing their data and expanding into looking at securing data for AI, particularly personal context and training data. The folks here with me are deep experts from business and tech side. We're going to let everybody introduce themselves in a second. I just want to say briefly that we've seen this movie before with the battle for data with Web 2.0. If you think about the consolidation of power that happened over the last decade with Google, with Metacorp and the social graph, Amazon's user reviews, all those huge data sets aggregated to a few players that really have all the power in that ecosystem, and the vast majority of the value created accrued to those players. And we're seeing that start to play out right now with this rise of AI, and we're hoping that things will be different this time around with all the technologies we have to bring to bear to decentralize power and to give individuals more control. So with that, I'm going to quickly let the folks here give a quick one-line intro, and then we'll get right into the questions. So I'll start with Fabian. We'll move on down the line.
Hi, my name is Fabian. I'm a founding team member of the World Project. Maybe some of you know us. We are on a mission to build the largest network of verified humans online. With the project, again, since like 6 years already. And I'm excited to talk about the topics today.
Rahul's got some technical difficulties.
Sorry, let's borrow Fabian's mic. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Rahul from Singapore, looking after data partnerships and AI licensing for Shutterstock in the region. At Shutterstock, we started as a stock image company 20-odd years ago, but over those 20 years, we've amassed a library of 750 million assets, not just images, but video, audio, 3D templates. And so for the last few years, we've been working with all the biggest hyperscalers, model LLMs, AI companies to leverage not just the assets, but the metadata as well. So happy to be here, and looking forward to a good discussion.
And Sandeep.
Yeah, great to see everyone again. My name is Sandeep. I'm a chief scientist at Poseidon. I'm also a professor at UT Austin, broadly working on Gen AI.
Great, and I'm going to start with you, Sandeep. A breakdown, Sai gave this breakdown last night, that's why I gave it last night. I've seen it many times that you look at the AI landscape in terms of kind of three key vectors. There's the actual models, and there's a few key big players now that dominate. We all know those players, Anthropic and OpenAI, XAI, et cetera. Compute is the second big axis, also a few key players, NVIDIA, AMD, et cetera. But the data landscape is still a little bit more wild and woolly, basically a little wilder. And I'd love to get your take on the bottlenecks there and how you would describe the data landscape as it stands today and the looming data wall that you hear a lot of these AI players talk about.
Yeah, so the data landscape is wide open, and there are different facets of it. So on one end, you see extremely specialized labor. For example, a large language model can now just write general code. It can write emails. But if I want it to parse a complex legal document, or you want it to parse a medical document and make diagnoses, you actually need to get highly specialized data from doctors, lawyers, and PhDs, for example. So there are a couple companies doing very well there, like Mercor in the US, even Handshake, which are big recruitment platforms. The other kind of spectrum here is on physical AI. So here it's just imitating the average human. But for that, I need multimodal data. So I need video, audio, LiDAR, radar, and the combination thereof. So it's very fragmented. There are no clear winners.
That's kind of the way, yeah, that lines up with what I've been seeing myself as we look at the landscape. And Rahul, I'd love to get your take on, within this landscape, how do you see people start to protect IP rights, given what you're seeing at Shutterstock? How's that going to work? Is there infrastructure in place that just needs to scale, or is it actually innovation required to kind of get us there in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely innovation is required. I mean, the landscape's moving so fast. I mean, just a few years ago, the biggest kind of popular deals were our entire corpus, right? They wanted everything and anything. And I would say the appetite's still, very insatiable. They just want more data. But to Sandeep's point, it is getting more hyper-specific, very, very, just very, very specialized use cases, especially like in the medical field, the physical field, 3D stuff. And so we're getting requests for much more curated assets, but also metadata, very hyper-specific, very detailed metadata that hasn't necessarily been the case, and we've been leading it at the forefront. And even we find ourselves short, and continue to see how we can fulfill those types of requests. And I would say other players in the industry are looking to catch up there. So I do think as we look into 26 and beyond, I mean we really are thinking how we can innovate and look to service our customers at scale in a much more kind of automated way versus these kind of bigger enterprise deals that take a lot of manual time and input.
Just can you break down, just elaborate on that, like break down just at a very high level, how do these deals get done? Like what are the actual steps? How much is automated versus just like actual contract negotiations?
So for us, I mean, anytime it's, say, a portion of our library or entire corpus, it's like doing an enterprise SaaS deal. It's a long, pretty large ACV, long timeline. A lot of it is spent on negotiating just in terms of the price per asset, in terms of what exactly they're looking for, the specs, et cetera. And then especially now as these use cases get more and more hyper-specific, whether it's medical data, academic data, certain city or image or nature data, or even just humans, like, it has to be a human in a specific pose in a certain background with a certain set of metadata. There's also a fairly significant operational component to that in terms of looking at our 500 million assets and finding those. So between the curation as well as the ongoing contract negotiations, there's a lot of manual input, which we're looking to try and automate. Okay, got it. So very manual. And then Fabian, in your world, you're dealing with the data of humans all over the world. That can't be manual. So how do you and your company, or your foundation, how do y'all deal with the AI players and the data that you have to offer right now for your...
I think right now we are not so much like offering data. Actually, we're not doing this at all. What we are doing is we are providing an infrastructure for existing players out there to actually make sure that the data is from a verified or authentic source, meaning a verified human. So we see ourselves as like one of the fundamental infrastructures, especially when it comes to real-world training data, where you actually need to make sure that you're interacting with a real human online.
And given your significant deployment of a wallet infrastructure, do you see your technology getting involved with actual value exchanges for data with AI systems? Do you see that happening at all? With obviously the individuals making those decisions, since they have the wallets?
So we have, in different regions, we have different types of partnerships. So right now, world has roughly 20 million verified users around the world that showed up in front of an orb at some point in time. And those users are then able to prove to a platform that they are a verified human without providing their government ID. They can prove to the platform, or the platform can ensure that certain actions are only done one time. And then we see through our partners a lot of different business models built on top of that. So, for example, that you provide like input to a questionnaire, just a very simple example, and you can be sure that every answer to that questionnaire is actually an interaction from a real human, which kind of increases the quality of the survey dramatically. That's just a very simple example.
Got it. And taking all that data, Sandeep, do you have any thoughts on how that data ownership could be actually managed in the real world with respect to AI platforms, training models, et cetera? Like, how would that be approached? How could that be approached?
Yeah, definitely. So one big problem now is, can I verify that AI training data is authentic? It's not generated by an agent, synthetic data, and it comes from a specific human at a specific place and time. This is something we're even grappling with for the Poseidon DPIN reference implementation. We have a lot of high quality audio, but just if we inspect a little bit of it, some of it is spam. But through this integration and partnership with World, you can kind of have this proof of personhood, which creates much more authentic AI data. And I think this is going to be an exacerbated problem. If I need high quality text data from a lawyer and doctor, I need to know the metadata. It's from a human, but an actual licensed lawyer, for example.
Right. Wait, can you walk us through that real quick? So, like, let's say you've got an actual lawyer verified by World. I want to have a contract reviewed. How would that, can you just quickly, the high level data flow, how would that work in your mind?
Yeah, so you'd have to first establish a proof of personhood, but that's not enough, right? You'd have to have some sort of oracle to some extent to ensure that their profession is as stated. Now, we have to think about the details of how to actually implement that. But then that would be a very valuable use to even these so-called eval benchmarks. So for example, OpenAI has a health benchmark called Health Bench. It's from verified doctors, but imagine doing that in a decentralized way where I don't actually have to go to, say, Stanford Hospital to get that, right?
Right.
If I can add something to that, and exactly this, that proof of personhood is like a starting point. But sometimes in order to sometimes you need more, right? So that is why I think roughly 6 or 7 months ago, we also enabled our users to add their passport. And now we are able to do selective disclosure. This means instead of sharing your address, you would share that you are a citizen of South Korea. Instead of sharing your date of birth, you're sharing that you're above 18. And to your point, we are now working with more and more of those trust anchors to enable more and more of those kind of selective disclosures.
Yeah, I think data minimization that you're referring to is a huge part of the answer. The other piece is data scoping. Do you have any thoughts around how data gets scoped? So, for instance, the fact that a person is a resident of South Korea, how does that get scoped if they want that only available to certain applications for certain time windows?
Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. So you have this data that you minimize, like I'm a citizen of this country, but not where I live specifically. But I want to use it for a particular, like registering for a school where you need to be a resident. Do you have any thoughts on how that would be restricted so it's only used for that purpose, for that registration, and then that data expires, versus just being out there in the wild so other AI platforms could pick up that in the training data out there in the wild?
Yeah, so how the world right now works is that if you, just one example, if you want to verify your LinkedIn account, the current industry standard is that you provide your full-fledged passport. Now, I would say this is a lot of personal data just for verifying your social account. What our mission is to kind of try to strike a balance. Enable businesses in a enable businesses to achieve their goals in a privacy-preserving way, or as privacy-preserving way as possible. And then what you're referring to, this is something that then there's a business decision on the other side. Our mission is to just make sure that as little data as possible is shared in the process.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So moving on from really personal data to synthetic data, I want to go back to Sandeep on what are your thoughts on this? Another way that people are addressing, or platforms are addressing the data wall, is to generate synthetic data, but then you get this issue of exhaust and cruft. What are your thoughts on that whole topic and how that should be addressed?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So synthetic data is near and dear to my heart through some of the academic work I do. So there are 3 benefits of synthetic data. The first is anonymization, and The second is what we call data augmentation. So I can use some real data and large amounts of synthetic data and join them together. And people have proven empirically that really boosts accuracy on real training data. I'll give you some examples. And the last use of synthetic data is actually stress testing or creating new scenarios. Like I talked about in my talk, like I take an image from my dash cam, but really my computer vision model does poorly in fog, sleet, or snow. So how do I augment my data using these test cases, right? So you're seeing the use of a mixture of real and synthetic across the board in AI. Like imagine I want to create high-profile coding data to train the next Cursor models or Anthropic's Claude Code. I can give you a rough solution, but you need to kind of fine-tune that with the human feedback.
Got it. And I want to kick it over to Rahul. How do you manage that in your world? You have such a huge corpus of actual media content. How do you look at that as far as synthetic data, AI-generated images versus authentic images, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, and, it's a constant debate, amongst our leadership, just in terms of, how much of an existential crisis is that, especially as we get closer to that inflection point where synthetic data becomes, really kind of indistinguishable. I don't think we're there yet, but where we are, I think, separating ourselves in the marketplace, especially to, leaders like Sandeep or Fabian, or just, any of the kind of companies who are hungry for data. We're constantly adding, 1 to 2 million assets a week, so we're constantly building to our library. Every single every single asset that we add to our library, going back 20 years, has metadata that's been entered by a human. So to the other panelists' earlier point, it's all been verified and put in by the original contributor. And what we're offering is ethically cleared, legally cleared, GDPR compliant, everything that's that these global players can take confidence in, that we've taken the steps to make sure that this is good for use for training, and it will not just be good for 6 months, but good for the foreseeable future. And I think that's what's helping us do the deals. It's that quality, and so hopefully that continues to be the case. That demand and hunger for that real data.
Just digging into that a bit on the you mentioned the kind of the length of time. Do you see, I guess, an orthogonal question here, but do you see the data, kind of the freshness or the drive for updated data being a key part of what you're doing? Like the certain people, celebrities, et cetera, they change their look over time, et cetera, whatever it is. Do you see that being a key part of what training models are looking at, or is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly, yeah. I mean, I think especially these requests are becoming more specific and relying more on expertise. Just for example, we're seeing so much more demand now than we ever have for longer form video, conversational audio, which isn't something that's kind of been native to Shutterstock or other kind of companies in that we compete with on a day-to-day basis. But these are interesting data sets that we're also looking to acquire. I mean, we've been acquiring libraries or representing libraries for the better part of 20 years, and we're doing a lot more of that. But as we see these trends emerge, we're also looking to make sure to cater to that. So to that degree, then yes, the freshness comes into place. And look, I mean, a lot of creators and contributors, because we rely on millions and millions of contributors, some of them want to take back their content, and so we have to continue to replace that. And so our partners expect us in that. It's not just a one-time transaction; it's an ongoing partnership where we're constantly updating them and then replacing the content so that their libraries are full.
So you actually go to your partners. If I was going to be asking to revoke my image, you would actually go back to your partners and say that needs to come back.
That's right. We'll do it on a regular basis and make sure that that's deleted from the repositories, but then we'll go ahead and replace it or find an adequate replacement. And
do you think that's auditable, do you feel like, or do you feel like that's more of a trust-based interaction with the partners?
Well, it's trust-based. I mean, trust, but then it's backed by legal contracts and everything. And so, yes, I mean, ultimately, there is that trust factor, but I mean, certainly all our partners, I think, they're putting themselves at risk if they don't comply, obviously.
And Fabian, do you this kind of issue of real data, synthetic data, do you have any thoughts on provenance and how that data could be anchored to actually prove that it is truly from a human versus synthetic, or even just proving that this person is in fact a doctor, et cetera?
I think, as I said earlier, this is a little bit the thesis of how World started. When we started this whole thing 6 years ago, Sam approached like us as a small group with the basic problem on the table that if AI evolves in the pace that he's seeing, it will be impossible to distinguish humans from bots, especially online. And in order to make sure that the internet and the products that we love are still working also like in a couple of years back then, we need to come up with a technology to ensure that we kind of make exactly this distinction, right? That we have social networks where we know that a person is a real human, or maybe there are other users where we're not sure, but it's at least clear to the consumer. So we see proof of personhood exactly as this kind of foundational infrastructure, not to completely prevent synthetic data. A human can still use whatever tools to create text online, but at least we know that the source is like a unique person. So we see ourselves more as like as a first defense line, if that makes sense. But there needs to be, we are not like the solution to all of the problems.
And how do you think about the balancing the need for authenticity? Because, internet trolls largely are anonymous, right? Or it's often they're anonymous, and that's why they can have that kind of behavior that's so corrosive with social environments. But then on the other hand, there's the right to be forgotten, and there are certain cases where that's really critical in certain geopolitical situations. How do you think about those trade-offs, and how do you, at World, how do you all handle that dichotomy?
We believe that, like for us, authenticity is proof of personhood. It is like a verified account, which you can still delete your account, but at least as long as you're interacting online, the other side knows that he's not interacting with a made-up person, right? So this is the kind of solution that we are offering, that you can at least be sure that you're not just interacting with one of 100 accounts steered by one individual, but that you're interacting with one individual.
And Sandeep, are you, with your integration with Poseidon, are you dealing with this issue of right to be forgotten and that kind of privacy aspect at all?
Not on the short term for Poseidon, but in general, right to be forgotten is very important in the European market. So I think it's baked into GDPR, which is Europe's privacy law. But there's a lot of synergies here that we can talk about in the future. So one key aspect that people are talking about now is so-called sovereign AI. So let's say the Korean government wants to sponsor a foundation model for, say, maybe the Korean populace, right? Maybe you want to verify that all the training data came from Korea. And now, even if you talk to the US government, Department of Defense, they have a lot of data collection needs, but they have a so-called data card and a model card. So the data card means that this data came from verified citizens of certain countries. It was not handled by others, and every step in the supply chain of data is audited, right? So these are all things that World could potentially handle.
Right. And then if somebody wanted to, like you said, pull themselves out, do you anticipate any mechanisms for that with what you're building, or is that even relevant to your models you're looking at?
Definitely. On the algorithmic side, there are ways to handle this. So, and it also gets into a concept like data evaluation. So ideally, I want to train a model on all of our data, and let's say you want to opt out. I should not retrain the model. I should look at the delta, the marginal sensitivity of the model and its accuracy with and without your data. That's a way for me to also reward you to say, hey, you get a differentiated payout to me. Yes. So there are algorithmic ways to handle this.
And just going to shift gears a little bit while we're talking about this personal data. Lately, we've been looking a lot at memories, both the stream, if you think about your own real life, the stream of everything that's ever happened to you, and then the state, which is, in your mind, you can't recall, right, everything that's happened to you, but you are changed by things that you've experienced that you may not even remember. How do you think about that with, as an engineer, chief scientist anyway, about, state versus stream with personal data and how that might affect the marketplaces in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it has actually deep connections to like the philosophy of AI. So in AI, we call this continual learning. So the state is a summary of everything I've learned up until now and a concise snapshot. So that should allow me not to encode all of history, but a concise summary. But certain times I need to recall rare events. People are hosting this in memory, often what's called a vector database. And your AI needs to adapt over time and not forget. So that's called catastrophic forgetting. It's a huge problem in conventional models. So augmenting your current information with some semblance of the past is, a hot topic for research.
Catastrophic forgetting is a problem in real life too, I've experienced, but yeah.
Exactly.
If it's your wife's anniversary or yeah. Rahul, how does this affect Shutterstock? So back to you. Do you those two vectors at all play out in the kind of corpus of data that you're responsible for, or is it more of a straightforward linear kind of structure as far as the data you manage?
What do you mean when it comes to, like, for example,
Like, do you drop?
sovereign?
When you tie data back to a source.
We do, yeah. I mean, so actually, to Sandeep's point, we've been seeing a lot of in the emergence of sovereign AIs, especially in our region. So Korea's obviously, just a couple months ago announced the WBM, this, $80 billion project that's both a public-private partnership. We're seeing an emergence in Australia. My colleagues and I are actually headed there in a couple of months. There's a new model being launched there by a private enterprise, but again, focused on Australian sovereignty. Singapore, where I'm based, they launched a model, and it's coming from two angles. One is like Sandeep said, the origin of the content. Is it all, the training data all sourced from Singapore or from that sovereign, so it can be trusted, but also the usage. So so for example, when I talk to the Singapore model, they're building a specific Southeast Asian model because they see the other ones not necessarily catering to the citizens of Singapore or the surrounding countries. And so they're trying to build a model that's hyper useful for that audience. But then, I would say the other side of it is just the security risk. And so when we think about that, because we're a global company and obviously a US headquartered company, we obviously try and create those data, the subsets of data that come from those certain countries. But yeah, I think, over time, especially now that we're seeing interest in the Middle East as well and other countries, so this is going to become more and more relevant for us.
And building on your business, do you think, with the 12 minutes left, I think we should talk about money for a bit here. I think a lot of people want to hear about the money side of this landscape. Maybe Fabian, you could start. Do you think we have the makings of a healthy data market for AI now? Do you feel like we have major shortcomings to overcome? What's your kind of assessment of where we are with an actual data marketplace?
I think the other two would be actually more qualified to comment on that one, because just like we are the infrastructure for a lot of those products. But yeah, but maybe you can talk more about this.
Sandeep, your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're seeing the semblance of like a data economy. Some of the fastest growing startups in the US, like Merck, for example, and I mentioned them before, are doing like high skilled labor for training AI. But the thing is, they're typically doing one-off jobs. So this is, you curate data from abroad, and it's fully owned by the foundation model company. Now, getting into cases where we can license it dynamically, like with Shutterstock, but actually reuse that data and get highly bespoke data. There's no clear winner, so I think it's a very open space.
And Rahul, do you have thoughts on how individuals can participate? How do people start to really
Yeah,
get benefits from this
to your point, I
marketplace?
think there's a lot of shortcomings. I mean, sometimes we feel like we're a little life raft in the wave of tsunami, right? But it's kind of the same battle. Like I think you started off with the same battle we've been facing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40, like just with the advent of piracy, right? Like how and copyright ownership, and so how do we ultimately make sure that companies, but to your point, individuals get contributed for their creation, and that there's transparent legal framework to recognize that. And so I think what Fabian is doing, what Sandeep is doing, helps make sure that becomes transparent and just frictionless, right? And so that's why we're excited about those technologies. But yeah, certainly from our perspective, I think all those foundations can be set now before it becomes kind of really too late. It doesn't help when you have the biggest players in the game saying, "Oh, AI is too important. The race is too vital for us to worry about copyright or ownership." But naturally, the time is now to set those protocols and foundations. So yeah.
And so one key aspect of a marketplace is a key element you need is trust, right? So clearly what World's been working on is the idea of trusting that you actually are dealing with a real person. Fabian, have you all thought about how that may play into reputation systems in marketplaces, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you just know, like, let's say you have a reputation system, but it's still one person can control like 10 or 100 accounts and can contribute something, but it's still a very biased behavior, right? Yes. I think what we do with proof of personhood, it's like a kind of a ground truth. So it kind of sets the bar at a certain level, and then you can build on top of that within your product, you can build a reputation system that actually works, where you don't have the challenge of, like completely getting biased directions because it's literally the same person that just abuses your scheme.
And I guess at the app layer, the safeguard against a bunch of accounts tied back, 50 bots tied to one person is that when you trace them back, they keep coming back to the same person. So you can, at the app layer, say, this isn't valid. I've got 50 accounts all back to one person. Is that right?
I think our technology, when we integrate with partners, comes a little bit earlier. It's just like an alternative how you verify your account.
Yep.
So this means, let's say the one person had 50 accounts. This person now can only create one verified account, but there's no way to tie back if the other 49.
Got it. So if you try to create account number 2, you basically reject that request in some way, effectively, or
or the platform just has a different incentive scheme for verified accounts versus unverified ones, and then work with incentive on their customer bases to actually make this a thing and attract real users because they can be maybe more sophisticated with their incentives.
And how do you think about facets of people? So we've thought a lot about this in my own career. You definitely don't want thousands of bots out there trolling people. At the same time, you may want to have different, your work persona, so facets or personas, your social persona, etc., your family persona, and you may want them, theoretically, it's not common right now, but you may want them in the same app. Do you have any thoughts on how that would get managed? I know it's at the app level, but just any thoughts on? It's a hard problem, I know.
No, I think it's, again, like the application can decide how many accounts can be created with a world ID or proof of personhood, with like one world ID, so to say. This means, let's say, if you see in your customer base in your product, the use case that people usually have 2 accounts, one maybe professional and one maybe whatever, like family account. Then the platform can decide that one world ID is good for verifying 2 accounts. Of course, it's not the perfect solution, right?
Right.
But there's always a path for enabling. You just, like, the application layer is much more in control what actually happens because they can make a very conscious decision. They can say, okay, I take the risk that maybe there's like that one human has 3 accounts, but they at least know and can apply this knowledge to their fraud machines and all what they have like within their product because they have this fundamental knowledge about their user base.
Right, and even if you could just do crude algorithms like just limiting the number, that would go a long way, right? Because you can't do as much damage if you're limited to 3 or 4 accounts anyway. So you probably get 80% of the gains with some of these simple solutions. Yeah. Sandeep, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that is also like one of the things that you saw or that you still see today in social networks is that you have like a post and then you have like 100 fake comments underneath this post that all imply to an organic user that there's like a huge group of people that agrees with a certain opinion.
Right.
But in reality, it's all kind of made up because it's fake accounts and it's generated text and whatnot. But this one person gets dragged in and maybe comments, and then you kind of, by kind of faking approval or social approval by synthetic accounts, you then might be actually successful to impact the real opinion underneath that social post. So what I'm trying to get to is, I think, we truly believe that especially social networks and social interactions online without some way of proof of personhood or like a verified human badge, it will be very, very tough, and I think it will also like break a lot of the products out there.
Yeah, without proof of personhood, I think, yeah, the overall internet's broken if we can't get that solved. And Sandeep, I want to come back to money again for a second. So, do you have any thoughts on the same topic we were discussing on how individuals can participate in these data marketplaces? Any thoughts from
Yeah, there's a big money component naturally. The way I view it is a data dividend, right? So I contribute data. The instant it's licensed or bought by a foundation model company, everyone in the value chain of data gets, say, a stablecoin or some sort of like micro payment. That's the person who captured the raw data, the labeler, and the person who might have created a remix of this, right?
Yeah, one of the promise of NFTs, right, and all that is that tracking these things.
Yeah, AI training data is an NFT to some extent.
Right. So, can you talk more about what you're doing in your project at Poseidon, as far as with data? Do you have any, what intersections you have with this whole kind of problem space?
Yeah, definitely. So this voice data collection was a reference implementation, but we've got a huge amount of data. So now our first task order is to kind of differentiate what amount of data is spam and what's authentic. To our first view, it seems like it's quite authentic. And there's actually really interesting analytics we're doing. So we have the Poseidon web app and the world integration. So you can ask questions like, by virtue of using the world app, do we have a lower percentage of spam, right? Kind of alluding to some of these questions. But the key question these foundation model companies ask us is, how do I prove that your data is good? And the natural way to do that is to train our own model. So you can take an open source model and train it and fine tune it on the Korean language. And indeed, if our data is much better, we should see higher accuracy on public benchmarks. The other part of this is actually, even before training a model, you can do an evaluation benchmark. So there are a lot of startups in the whole LLM evaluation space. That means that I have tough math questions, tough legal documents, and you test LLMs, but we can create our own evaluation benchmark based on the public data that we've collected from Poseidon to stress test, say, OpenAI's Whisper.
Cool. And you mentioned just got me thinking, we mentioned the Korean language aspect. What do you view as the geopolitical kind of implications of the data landscape, data battlefield, we're calling it here? Do you see those restrictions being actively enforced in effective ways, or do you see right now it's still an open sea kind of data right now washing across the platforms?
It's a great question. So, we deal a lot, even in my academic hat, with European companies or even American companies working in Europe. They're very strict about GDPR. So a lot of questions we get asked are, is this data authentic? Is it licensable? But even some companies do not allow us to use synthetic data because the stable diffusion might have been, or variance, might have been trained on IP unsafe data. So you're seeing that from a privacy perspective, but then again, going back to sovereign AI, especially when AI is being used for defense applications, you see a big question on where was the data sourced and where was the model sourced. In fact, I think there was some press about Meta's Llama being used by the Department of Defense in the US, and they had to use maybe a different model architecture and or data set.
Yeah, that we're running out of time here to get into that was going to trigger my questions about the next set of geopolitical national defense concerns around AI, which is a hugely deep topic. But for now, I think we're going to have to wrap up with where we are with this landscape. As you can probably all tell, this is a evolving story. There's a lot more ahead than there is behind us on this right now. I appreciate all of you here, and thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
all. Thank you.